reign of the last Khan of Khans began with a war between two princes, brothers. The youngest was called Arig Bok. After the death of Mongol Khan, he claimed the throne in the name of those Mongols who still lived on the steppe and who still followed the traditional way of life. His brother, Kublai, was more sophisticated. He had adopted a great many customs from Chinese civilization and wished to lead the empire down a different path. The civil war that developed in 1260 was the first time Mongol had fought Mongol since the tribal wars of Genghis Kahn, and it threatened to shatter the entire empire. But the two brothers were not evenly matched. Although Arig Bok had the support of all the great Mongol families, he didn't have his brother's strategic genius. Long before any real harm could be done, Arig Bok's armies were defeated, and Kublai emerged victorious. There is nothing in the formal court portrait of Kublai, as an older man, that indicates just how different he was from the other Mongol Khans. But for a start, he grew up here, on land he inherited in northern China. Although he learned to ride and hunt like any other Mongol prince, he was also taught how to read and write. He had grown up in a land of farmers and learnt from Chinese teachers to respect and care for the well-being of the people who worked the land. By the time he was 30, he ruled a vast and extremely prosperous principality. Kublai's attachment to his Chinese subjects earned him many enemies back in Mongolia, but nothing infuriated them more than his decision to build a city on Chinese territory. This is almost all that is left of that city, Shangtu. It was built on the frontier between the steppe and the cultivated fields of northern China. Behind its walls, Kublai built a hunting reserve and had it stocked with animals for his sport. Rivers and lakes were dug, and grass was planted from the Mongol steppe. We in the West know this place as Xanadu.
In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alf the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to the sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests, ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery.
These are the foundations of the Pavilion of Great Harmony, which once stood at the heart of the palace city. The roof tiles were once bright green, the grounds decorated with altars and carved statues. Surrounding it were a number of smaller palaces and government buildings. Inside, the pavilions had gold leaf ceilings and walls lined with painted silk. The man who built this stately pleasure dome was not only extremely wealthy, he was also extremely cultured and had great vision. It was the home of the man who was about to inherit the mantle of Genghis Khan. By 1264, with his enemies cowed into submission, Kublai was accepted as the next great Khan. And so began the reign of Kublai. It was to be an illustrious one. But the unity of the empire had been strained by the civil war. It would take a man of immense resources to bind it together. The empire that Kublai inherited had already been divided into separate khanates, ruled by various descendants of Genghis. In the far west was the Golden Horde, conquered under Otagai Khan. To the south was the Ilkhanate, ruled by the conquerors of Persia. In the center was the Chagatai Khanate, and the rest of the empire, the Mongol homeland and China, was the personal domain of the great Khan. At that time, it was the largest empire in history, yet there was still room for expansion. To the southeast lay the unconquered lands of the Sung, still the real heart of China, and a challenge to Kublai. Kublai's campaign against the Sung began with the conquest of the tiny kingdom of Dali, which lay on the borders of Tibet and guarded the western approaches to Sung China. The conquering of this remote kingdom itself was swift and bloodless, so much so that Kublai was moved to grant the people of Dali rare privileges in return for their submission. Before he moved on, he erected a pillar engraved with his instructions. There was to be no plundering of this little kingdom. It then went on to describe in detail Kublai's prowess as a general. Though led by Mongol officers, the bulk of Kublai's forces were made up of Chinese infantry. Southern China was either densely forested or covered in paddy fields, not good terrain for cavalry. So when Kublai's army set forth for Sung China, they did so on foot. These new armies had different needs. No longer could they hunt for their rations. Supply lines would have to be established. New strategies would also have to be developed. There would be no lightning raids, no set-piece cavalry battles. This war of Chinese against Chinese would take years to unfold. The Sung had a great many fortified cities, and when Kublai's forces tried to take Xiangyang, they were held at bay for 5 years. The Sung were ferocious defenders. They had a considerable culture to defend. They also had a great navy and would never be really conquered until they were defeated at sea. So again, the Mongols had to adapt to a new form of warfare. With Korean and Chinese ships, they pursued the Sung navy until it was finally destroyed in 1276. When the last male heir to the Sung dynasty was drowned, resistance collapsed. When the Mongol forces finally entered the Sung capital of Hangzhou at the mouth of the Yangtze River, they were confronted with the largest city on earth. More than 1.5 million people lived in this great seaport, and its wealth and importance to the empire was unimaginable. From here, a massive civil service governed a nation of nearly 40 million people. Built around a network of canals and waterways, it was the pearl of southern China. Along its causeways, the victorious Mongols rode into what was then the most important city in all the Orient. Its palaces, granaries, treasure houses and temples were catalogued by the Mongol commanders and a census conducted of all the inhabitants. In contrast to the aftermath of previous Mongol victories, no destruction of the city's buildings and treasures took place, and the Sung royal family were allowed to live in relative comfort for the rest of their lives. The entire campaign and the way victory was achieved was all part of a much larger strategy, not only to conquer, but to win both the hearts and minds of the Chinese. Kublai's senior wife, Chabi, encouraged this policy and urged her husband to proclaim himself emperor and founder of a new Chinese dynasty. It was extremely shrewd. By drawing on the principles of government laid down by Confucius, Kublai set about presenting himself to the entire Chinese nation as